Hey everyone, so it's been pretty interesting. Past couple of weeks, we've got the chance to spend some time with Diablo 4, having 2 full weekends, one of the open beta, and then prior to that, the pre-release, checking out the first zone of the game up to level 25. Although a lot of players were kind of left wondering what is next on us for the horizon. Well, we do know quite a bit about the end game of Diablo 4, just what's been publicly announced from Blizzard. They've talked about the different systems and how it will be structured. On top of that, though, we have been getting some pretty substantial leaks, we'll just call them what they are, from people who have playtested the end game. This is information in addition to anything officially released by the devs. Now, I'll have to tell you, if you are at all concerned about spoilers, you don't want to ruin this information yourself, this is a pretty detailed leak. They really dove into the nitty-gritty of what the end game systems actually entail and what it is that you'll be doing. So if that's something you don't want to spoil for yourself, I understand, but just realize that is what the rest of this video is going to be. I also want to clarify as well here, I am not breaking any NDAs. This is just one of those situations where someone breaks NDAs, this information is out in the public, and I always find it weird not to talk about it when it's all there readily available. It's kind of just like sticking your head in the sand and pretending it's not there. This information is out there, we know what it is, and I think we should talk about it. So what has been confirmed about the Diablo 4 endgame? What is it? Well, from what Blizzard has said publicly, we know that we have the Whispers of the Dead, which are more or less equivalent to the bounty system, just structured a little bit differently. But yes, they are rotating regular quests that you'll be doing for rewards. These will be cycling daily. Then of course there's the world boss. We got to see one of those. We fought Ashava in the beta, spawning at the bottom right hand corner on a set timer. We know that's a thing. We also have known about nightmare dungeons, which are essentially hard mode versions of the same dungeons as you come across while leveling, although Blizzard hasn't gotten really specific about how those were structured. And then there are hell tides, which are these zone-wide events that will buff the enemies in the area. They also grant specific rewards. And then of course we've got the PvP system with the Fields of Hatred, these open zones where you will fight other players, but then also there's NPCs, and you're all of which in service of farming for a particular resource. And then there's also the endgame system of the Paragon boards. So that is the general recap of these things. Now let's get into the leaks that really talk about the details. So starting off with the Whispers of the Dead, those bounty or daily quest equivalent. It was said that this is going to have us completing various objectives. These could include things like dungeons, open world events, world bosses, fighting the bosses in the PvP area, or doing PvP conversions where we're taking that base resource and then converting it into the usable resource. And doing any of these will reward you with grim favors. It actually fills up a gauge. At least that's how it worked in the end game beta. And also keep in mind with the rest of what we're talking about, how things worked in the end game closed beta test that took place might be different slightly or largely from what it actually launches with. But these are the lines that we know at least Blizzard has been going along. So it was said that the more rewarding objectives will be displayed on your map in like a deeper red color. It goes from like a light, so almost pinkish hue to a deeper red. The deeper the red, the more grim favors you're going to get from that activity. These were daily gated so that you eventually will run out of objectives to do. If you're just farming the deep red objectives in a day, eventually you have to go to the light red, and I presume eventually you'll just run out of grim favors that are even available. Now, once the gauge is full up, you then have to speak to the Tree of Whispers. It's in the small town in the swamp region of the world, and that tree then rewards you with experience and then gives you a bounty cache, and this is where you can choose from amongst a few specific items. It was said as well that these caches have a high chance to drop legendary items, nightmare sigils, along with other things. Now, in prior leaks that have come out a couple months ago, I also remember recalling that these caches would also be like item type specific, so you could pick, I really want a two-handed sword, or I really want a helm, and then you're going to be given an assortment of that specific type of item. In terms of the difficulty of this, it was said that this is a pretty easy chill activity, which you would assume to be for most daily quests, and it also lets you pick whatever objectives you want, so there's variety there. Like, you can decide how you want to fill up the gauge. You don't have to just do these particular things. You could do easier things or a wide variety of things, whatever you want. And the rewards that you get for doing the Whispers of the Dead include the nightmare sigils. This apparently is a very good source of those. These will be basically the keys that we use to make nightmare dungeons, the experience that you get for your character, and then any legendary item drops. Okay, now let's move on to the Helltide events, which are evidently comparable to Diablo 2's Terror Zones. Basically what happens here is a big area somewhere on the map will be completely engulfed with this event. It becomes corrupt, and in doing so, the area is populated with these new and more dangerous monsters, as well as bosses and events that can spawn there specific to the Helltides. These also include a very strong roaming boss boss, apparently named Karax the Forerunner, that usually requires a group to be defeated. Evidently, this is very difficult, can be soloed, but requires a strong build or being overgeared. So yes, killing stuff in these areas will reward you with these aberrant cinders, which allow you then to open these chests called tortured gifts that are scattered around the region when a Helltide event is happening. And those chests will actually give a specific legendary. That legendary will be indicated on the chest itself, so you know ahead of time what you will be getting when you turn in those cinders to open that chest, as well as this unique crafting material called the Fiend Rose, which evidently wasn't found anywhere else in the game and allows you to upgrade your gear to the highest rank. So you know how we've got the ability to upgrade our gear, the different rarities have different amounts that can be upgraded, but you basically just enhance the overall power of it. Well, apparently that final rank requires the Fiend Rose, which as of that closed beta endgame test was only found during Helltides. Difficulty of these events is said to be fairly easy. It can be soloable with the exclusion of that roaming boss that is found in the Helltides. If you have a decent build, you can just go into Helltides yourself and do anything, although it will be more efficient if you are in a group, which I guess isn't that surprising. And the rewards for Helltide events are again those Fiend Roses, as well as the specific legendary items that you can see ahead of time on those chests that you're going to be opening with those cinders that you're gathering. Next up is the world boss, which they compared to a loot pinata. So during the endgame closed beta test, the world bosses spawned every hour or so. This is a marked departure from what we got in the open beta and pre-release beta that just happened, where the world bosses only spawned a couple times a day. In fact, there were some days where they didn't spawn at all. Well, during the endgame closed beta, they were happening every single hour, and there would be a 30-minute warning before the boss spawned that would show up on the map just like it did in the recent beta. Now, world bosses are always on a spawn timer, it was said, and will show up in one of their dedicated arenas, these empty spots on the map, which are very, very obvious. There are a few of them scattered all around the map. We saw the one in the bottom right corner, the southeasternmost corner, when we were playing in the beta that was specific to Ashafa. There was talk at some point about world bosses just appearing anywhere in the world. That doesn't appear to be the case, but it seems like they can potentially hop around a few different areas once the full map is open and all of the bosses are available. Difficulty, they said it's slightly challenging early on, but gets very easy at higher levels with a half-decent build. I'll say, at least from our experience in the recent beta test, the bosses weren't too difficult. I think there was only one time that I didn't clear it, but I ended up getting 4 or 5 clears between the 2 weekends, so it was certainly manageable. And that's just playing with randoms, which, you know, you never know what you're gonna get, right? Rewards for these include the scattered prisms, which these are the items that you use to socket your gear, and they cannot be obtained anywhere else. And this is something we had learned prior as well, that once you got all the items that you want, you've got the good rolls, you've got the legendary aspects on them that you want, the next step will be to socket them and then fill them with these great gems, and getting that requires you to do the world bosses. And with much of the rest of the end game in Diablo 4, it does seem like they're giving pretty strong exclusive incentives for every type of activity. So there's a reason for you to do the world bosses, there's a reason to do Helltide events, there's a reason to do Whispers, there's reasons for you to do all of them if you're looking to progress all of the things that are progressible for your characters. And then of course, as we saw, the world bosses also will drop legendary gear, which again we saw in the recent beta. The next endgame activity is the PvP farming. It was said that whether or not you like PvP, the PvP area offers one of the most viable ways to farm legendary equipment. At least that was the case in the test. There's just a ton of monsters here. Evidently, mob density is ramped up way more than it is in the base overworld. That's kind of a complaint that we've seen from some people, that they feel like the density of enemies as you're wandering the world isn't enough. Well, apparently in the PvP zones, as well as in the Helltide zones, mob density is shot up much, much higher than it is by default. So there's a lot of monsters here. You're gonna farm these for Seed of Hatreds, or you can also get regular gear, and since there are so many monsters, there's better chances of getting all of that gear. And the Seed of Hatred themselves is a currency that gets converted. You go to these PvP altars, and then you convert it into something, but as you're doing that, everyone on the map knows that you're doing that conversion, and this is gonna draw attention to your location, and that's where the PvP aspect of this zone comes in, the risk versus reward of you going in there to try to farm these Seeds of Hatred, but risking dying and then having people take them. However, the good thing is that once you convert them at the altars, then they are staying on your account. You don't have to worry, even if you die, you're not gonna lose them at that point. Now, that converted resource is actually apparently used to gamble for gear, as well as being able to get cosmetics from it. So there'll be like PvP resource specific cosmetics, but then also kind of like the gambler in town, where you're trading the event oobles for a random chance to get gear. There's gonna be a similar system for this PvP resource. Now, it was said here that in the endgame CBT, this was the most viable way to farm for gear. And so what happened was most players would go into the PvP zones, but they wouldn't do the PvP flagging, which is what's referred to as blood marking. They would just go in there, not flag themselves for PvP, and work with other people to farm the PvE, get the drops, get the resource, convert it, and then gamble that converted resource. Now, this blood marking or flagging of PvP, once you do it, it allows you to attack anyone, including any non-blood marked players. It's essentially the hostile mode, and doing this actually increases the rate in which you get Seed of Hatred. But on the other hand, you can choose not to blood mark yourself and just cooperate with other non-blood marked players to simply farm PvE monsters, even at a reduced rate. You're not risking dying. Well, I mean, you are still risking because a blood marked player could come along and take you out, and that is just the nature of open PvP areas. That's how this is going to work. So difficulty, they said it is extremely variable depending on the hostile blood marked players that are present in the zone. The PvE monsters themselves are moderately challenging, although fine with a decent build, and the roaming boss in this area, a Khazra Abomination, can be difficult depending on your class and build. It could not be soloable. Playing in a group apparently is the most efficient way and gives you a significant advantage, and that is the case in pretty much any open world PvP game I've ever played. If you have more bodies there, a lot of times it doesn't matter how skilled the other players are. Variable for games, but we'll see how it plays out in D4. The rewards for the PvP farming are the Seeds of Hatred that you convert to gamble for gear or buy cosmetics, as well as the drops that come from the monsters, the regular drops including legendaries, and again, the mob density here is quite high. And the final major endgame system are the Nightmare Dungeons. These were comparable to Path of Exile's maps. You could also make the comparison to Rifts in Diablo 3, in that this is the endgame repeatable thing that you're going to be doing quite frequently. Now, this is evidently the most challenging content as of the closed beta test. We'll keep amending with that. As of the closed beta test, this was the hardest, most difficult content, and the one that you're probably going to be doing the most. It's what many will call the true endgame. So the Nightmare Sigils that you get from those other sources we mentioned earlier, these are consumable. They can be crafted at the Occultist, and taking a sigil to the particular dungeon that it's for will corrupt that dungeon with certain affixes. Now, once the dungeon is corrupted, you have to make your way to it by foot or horse. You don't just get instantly teleported there, so you got to go to the closest waypoint, walk to the entrance of the dungeon, or if other players are already there, apparently you could be summoned as well. And while you're in the Nightmare Dungeon, it's harder, yes, but you also have a limited number of revives. So the level of the monsters in the dungeon will depend on the tier of the sigil. As an example, a tier 66 Nightmare Sigil would give you monster levels of 120. And just as a reminder, the max player level in Diablo 4 is 100. So as for what changes, well, apparently the dungeon objectives themselves do not change. So everything that you still did in the normal version of the dungeon, going to find the key, activating the switch, bringing a stone to the door, that stays the same. However, monster density is increased, and some affixes may affect the way you play. One example they gave is there's an affix that makes a lightning bolt periodically hit you. It can one-shot you. However, there at the same time is an artifact following you around that will periodically cast a dome. So you have to go under the dome to avoid being hit by the lightning bolt and not get one shot. Basically what this does is it just adds another layer in addition to sprinting through the dungeon, AoE farming, and completing that dungeon's objectives. There's one more additional system to engage with on top of that, beyond the increased difficulty, the increased density, and then any changes the monsters themselves may have. And they said that there are probably a handful of such affixes like the lightning dome, which are kind of really standout features. For the difficulty of Nightmare Dungeons, this is again said to be the most challenging PvE content so far. The difficulty goes up to tier 100, while the open world content is limited to Torment, also known as tier 4. And reaching this high is going to require a very good, if not meta build, dare I say. And the Nightmare Dungeons are soloable, but playing as a group is more efficient, especially since it effectively gives you more revives, because if another player revives you rather than you clicking respawn, that doesn't count as one of your wasted revives. And since the number of revives are restricted in the Nightmare Dungeons, clearly there's a big advantage to playing here with other player. Rewards from the Nightmare Dungeons include glyphs, the leveling up of said glyphs, and this is going to be another aspect in addition to the Paragon boards, and the gear that you're farming for that plays into the endgame power progression. And evidently this is a great source of ancestral gear, however not the only source. And that is just about all of the big details when it comes to the endgame PvE content and some really interesting specifics. Now, as I mentioned partway through here, keep in mind, these are the details as of the closed beta test that happened for the Endgame, which was in fall of last year. Things can and may very well have changed from now and even up until release. There might be additional adjustments. We are expected to get some more official details and word from Blizzard in the coming months when it comes to Endgame. They specifically said they were going to talk more about this after the betas. The betas are over, so we expect them to talk more about it at some point soon. And I'll be interested to see how much of what Blizzard officially comes out with ends up lining up with some of this leaked information. But either way, pretty cool stuff, cool to learn about, and I'm really interested and excited to actually get to try all of these systems out for myself. That's going to do it today. Thank you guys for watching the channel, the new channel. Appreciate you stopping by, and I'll see you later for more Diablo 4 content. Take it easy.